Alrighty, thank you for joining my video. My name is David Sanchez. I am enrolled in EDP 520, and I will be presenting a paper called Intimate Partner Violence, Health, Sexuality, and Academic Performance among a national sample of undergraduates. So this research study specifically looks at the problem of intimate partner violence, here on out will be referred to as IPV, and how it affects academic performance. So data suggests that young adults aged 18 to 24 experience the highest rate of IPV compared to other age groups. Overall, 13% of all undergraduates report some form of IPV, which is unfortunate. However, there's little research done on how IPV affects academic performance, even though young undergraduates report high instances of IPV. And so that ties into the goal of the research, right? And so the main objective is to determine the association between intimate partner violence and academic performance among heterosexual and sexual minority undergraduates, including whether health mediates this relationship. So the health mediators that are looked at are physical and mental health, and when they say sexual minorities, the researchers are referring to lesbian, gay, bisexual, queer, and questioning folks. The three research questions that guide the study are: to what extent is IPV associated with academic performance among undergraduate students? To what extent is IPV mediated in its relationship with academic performance by students' physical and mental health? And to what extent does IPV affect academic performance differently for sexual minority undergraduates compared to their heterosexual peers? And so that leads to the hypothesis, right? So IPV is hypothesized to negatively affect physical and mental health, which in turn negatively affect academic performance as measured by GPA and self-reported academic difficulties. And so on the right-hand side of the screen, you'll actually see a theoretical model that helps explain the hypothesis a little further. So you'll see IPV on the left-hand side, and it's a latent variable, which means that we can't really measure it per se unless we operationalize it into further concepts, which are down here: stalking, sexual abuse, physical abuse, emotional abuse. Academic performance is also operationalized as lower GPA and then self-reported academic difficulties, and then you have health smack in the middle as the mediators. And so looking at the methodology, it's really important to know that there's a lot of variables going on, and so the analysis at the end is it's a little more complex compared to other studies, but the data collection and sample is actually quite a strength of the study because they had a final sample of about 85,000 undergraduate students from 120 post-secondary institutions. So that's quite a bit. And they were able to get that many students because there are universities that participate in the National College Health Assessment that is provided by the American College Health Association, or the ACHA. And so they were able to get their sample population from there. They specifically were looking for students aged 18 to 24 and undergraduates. The variables that are looked at in the study are going to be gender and sexual identity and IPV as independent variables. The mediating variables are going to be health, physical, and mental health. And then the dependent variable, or the variable to be observed, is going to be GPA and perceived academic problems. The one thing that's important to know right off the bat is that the analysis, even though there's different ones used, it's a correlational study, right? It's a correlational analysis that was used. It's not establishing a cause and effect relationship. And so the correlation is statistically significant because of the test that they ran. So that's important to know. And so the results show that regardless of sexual identity, undergraduates who reported IPV were more likely to have lower GPA and increased academic difficulties. And health mediates this relationship so that IPV reduces health, which negatively impacts academic performance. So what does that mean? So that means that, yes, the hypothesis was correct, right? But it's important to break this down further because this result is kind of packed neatly, tied with a nice bow on top, right? What's really important to know is that the most substantive path from IPV to academic performance is explained through the mediation of psychological distress. That's to say, intimate partner violence affects academic performance through mental health. So poor mental health equals academic performance. At least that's the relationship that exists anyways. And so being a sexual minority also increases the risk of IPV victimization, and that's quite unfortunate. So what does this mean for us? One, we know that IPV is a universal epidemic that needs to be resolved and prevented, especially for our young folks. And findings suggest that initial mental health system can be conceptualized as a loss of resources. In other words, if you have lower mental health, it's harder to be able to succeed in your academics because you just have lower resources in that case. And then bisexual students, interesting enough, were the group at highest risk for IPV within the LGBTQ community that they studied. And so there are some limitations to the study. One is the sample, right? So even though the sample was quite large, the overwhelming majority of the sample were white and straight. And the analysis was not large enough to account for transgender students, and questioning students were also left out of the final sample. So if anybody answered not sure about on their sexual orientation or identity, they were not counted. And only campuses that voluntarily took the NCHA were studied, right? And so, as a side note, I also want to say that the LGBTQ population is notoriously difficult to study because, one, all those letters represent a distinct community within that umbrella term. And being queer is also something that people need to disclose. Unless you're going around assuming, which you shouldn't in research, right? You need someone to report it. That's something that's difficult to see, right? And it's so stigmatized in our community even today that people might not even want to say what their true sexual orientation is, and they'll just assume a straight appearance or a straight identity. And this survey is also only offered to students currently enrolled in school. And so they've excluded people that left due to transfer, withdrawal, or separation, which in and of itself are indicators of academic performance. So unfortunately, that wasn't counted, which is unfortunate because that could have helped with the study. There was also some concerns with the measurements. Some of the questions were not inclusive of those who may have experienced IPV in the past. And so all this together really brings some concerns, and one of the biggest concerns that I found of the study was the external validity, right? It could really be affected. So I don't know if these results truly can be generalized to a bigger, larger population, especially one that's more diverse. So thank you for listening. And please check out this article. It's a really interesting read. It can really inform a lot of our jobs, even if you're not an SDHE student. If you're in the MFT program or any other program, this is really good information to know because we all work with or know somebody or were once undergraduate students. So it's really important to know this information.